All right, guys, welcome back to the WRPF podcast. I'm your host, Alex Uslar. This is episode 3. I'm very, very excited to have with me Naomi Sheppard. Naomi and I met about a year ago now, a little over a year ago at my meet, the Ghost Clash. And whoa, like she just came out of nowhere. I did not know personally who Naomi was. She wasn't like on the circuit here in the US powerlifting scene. And she came and she blew out the all-time world record squat in 148, attempted a 596-pound, 270-kilo squat, which would have been just under 600-pound, which would have been she would have been the lightest woman ever squat 600. I was just blown away. And on top of that, I was just blown away about how goddamn nice this woman and her husband are. Okay. So I was very excited to get her on the podcast, hear a little bit about her athletic background, coming to the WRPF here in the US, her eventual move here to the US. And so we got a lot of stuff to talk about. Welcome, Naomi.
Yeah. Hey. Thanks for having me. I'm still huge
Hell
on it.
yeah. Hell yeah. So kind of the way that I want to kind of flow it is we'll talk a lot about the present, the last year and a half with you here in the US powerlifting scene. But like I said, I still think here in the US, a lot of people don't know who you are, right? You've come over here, you've done, two of our big meets over here, and you're going to be moving over here. And I know we're going to be seeing some big stuff from you, in the coming years. But before we kind of get into the present, I want to take it back to the past, hear a little bit about your athletic background, growing up in the UK, where in the UK you're from, and we'll kind of dive into where that transition to powerlifting.
Basically, who am I?
Yeah, exactly. Who the
Yeah.
hell is this woman who almost squats 600 pounds?
um, I think I've probably got quite a different story to most people in that my athletic background is like quite different. And I would say it's probably best to say I didn't really have one.
Same,
um,
same.
yeah.
Didn't do anything
So
till I was 19 years old. Not a
yeah,
single
okay.
thing.
So like I only really started powerlifting, well, lifting, and when I was like 18.
Okay.
Previous to that, I did like no sports. I say no, but like I basically like didn't do any sports in high school just because I had something called Sever's disease, which basically meant that my heel bones kept breaking over and over again. So I spent like my age of like 10 to 16, 17 with both my legs in plaster.
No
Um,
shit.
so
So if you
like
would like if you tried to run, or was it if you would walk, make a weird movement?
So I basically like wasn't allowed to take part in sports. I had to sit them out and watch when I was at school. And then like I would go back to school like absolutely fine, couple of weeks, and then like just from walking and growing, like it was kind of caused by like obviously that's like prime growing age. So I don't have any issues with it now, obviously.
Right.
But yeah, basically like my heel bones would break. It's not usual for Sever's disease. Usually you just end up with some fractures and you can heal it and kind of don't overdo it and you're fine. But it's not something that usually affects women. It's genetic. So like my brothers had it, but I basically just had it undiagnosed and carried on. And like I remember like at 10 just complaining about my heels hurting all the time. Um and it basically went until like one of my heels completely like fractured into like loads of bits and then broke. And so then I was walking on one leg with crutches and that just caused the other one to break. So it was like they would heal, I would be fine for a few weeks and then they would break again. So I spent most of my like high school years at home because like my school didn't have wheelchair access, so obviously you can't go on crutches when you've got both your legs in plaster. So there were periods where I just had one in the cast and I would just walk on the one leg, but yeah, I mean it was pretty character building. But yeah, so by the time I got to university, I went up to University of St Andrews in Scotland. Like it's a really good university, but it also means that like the sports programs are really competitive. So I tried out for stuff because I wanted to get back into it, but because I had not done anything for so long, I basically didn't really get onto any teams other than I went on to korfball, which is like Dutch basketball, purely because no one else.
Softball, like
It's called korfball, like KORF
oh,
ball. It's
okay.
basically Dutch basketball. The net is much higher. It's kind of more like netball, but I purely only got onto that team because no one else knew how to play either.
Right.
So,
No one wanted to play that shit. It was like the
yeah,
last
like
resort.
yeah, exactly. It was like basically all the other losers that didn't know how to do anything, and we were all together. But it was something, obviously you've got the social side of it as well. Um, but yeah, like I was a science student, so I studied biochemistry. Most of my like degree was spent in the lab, like in the laboratory. So it kind of clashed with sport time anyway. And so I wanted something to do on my own that, I could go in the gym. I hated cardio. Like I was going on like all the machines, and like the weight room was something I was always interested in, but like obviously at that point, like that, this is like 13 years ago. It was not very common to see other women in there. So it's kind of
So how this
daunting.
was around 2010, 2011?
Yeah, like
Okay.
2010, yeah. So I'd done a lot of research into like what I could do to help with my bone density in the long run after everything I'd been through as a child. I didn't want to have any problems with my feet later in life. And so I'd read all about how like if you do compound lifts, they can improve your bone density. So I was like, I'm just gonna go and give it a go. So I think I started with like, strong lifts, like the most basic,
Horse. Yeah.
like, and I basically taught myself how to lift. And, at that point, it was still like I used to get stared at a lot because I was like the only female in the weights room. Like, it was, but I really loved it. And I like found a way of like pushing myself. And I think because of my limb proportions and I'm quite short, like I was just naturally really good at it. So, like, off my own accord and training on my own, I got like quite strong quite quickly, to the point where like I actually got like poached for the rugby team because I was so strong and they'd seen me training in the gym. So I kind of started playing rugby just because, again, like it was a team sport I could join in on, and I like had the strength. So yeah, but then like obviously you leave university and there's no team sports anymore. And like I'd really enjoyed powerlifting, so I just kind of, I didn't compete at that point, but I just love lifting. So I was training really hard in the gym all the time, like pushing myself. And then
So
I did my
around this
first.
time, just to cut you off real quick. So you looked at it as you were training the compounds, but it was formal powerlifting. Powerlifting wasn't quite mainstream in,
No,
2010,
like,
11, 2012. What were the kind of
yeah.
lifters? Were you seeing other lifters like that you were watching, trying to learn from? Like,
Yeah, I mean, at that point, like there wasn't a lot online. Like I was looking at people like Dana Lynn Bailey, who wasn't even a power lifter. She's a bodybuilder, right? But
right.
like she was performing compound lifts in her training, and like, yeah, like Instagram wasn't even a thing back then. I can't even remember what year
No,
it
not till like
started, but
2012, 2013, I
no,
think
exactly.
it
So it was
started.
like pre-Instagram era. I would just like I can't like I'd have to think like I was following like people's blogs, and there wasn't a lot of women like
Right.
to follow. And it wasn't really like I was kind of just doing it for myself and like didn't have much of like someone to kind of inspire to be, until like I met my husband Tom at university and he was also interested in it. So like that spiked my interest even more because we started training together. But in terms of like inspiration from women, I would say I didn't really know what powerlifting and that field was until I started competing and like looking into it then. And that wasn't until like 2015. So at that point, I've been lifting for a few years, not consistently like I did once I started competing, but like, when I say consistently for an average person, now when I say consistently, I'm comparing it to like how much effort I put in at this point, and it's like basically consumed my whole life. So
Right.
um yeah, and then obviously by 2015, Instagram was a thing. So most of the other lifters I were following were American. So it's kind of like always been like my dream to like compete in America amongst like the best lifters. So all the like the as I got further into competing, like big competitions like the US Open, and those are the things I would watch and be like, I want to go and do that, at some point. So for me, that was always like the pinnacle of what I was aiming to do. So
Well, I feel like also like just looking at your open powerlifting history when you started competing in 2015, obviously social media is a thing then. Powerlifting is starting to get bigger. You had the Andrew Milanichevs, the Brandon Lillies, Dan Green, all these guys all coming together to compete at Rum or, or a Pro Raw out in Australia or whatever it is. I know those
yeah.
were the meets when I started powerlifting 2013, 2014 that I was watching and those main figureheads. And there wasn't many elite level, or if any, females really around that time. It was more
Yeah.
these big guys. It was starting to break out of that it's the fat power lifter, the multiply,
Yeah.
whatever here in the US. But correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like in the UK, the thing that was big, I don't know if multiply was big, but I feel like single ply was pretty predominant there with the IPF and stuff like that. But you were competing raw, correct?
Yeah, so like when I started competing in 2015, it was like at that point, I mean, I think we're always a bit behind the US anyway, but like Raw wasn't there wasn't many of us competing and it was still kind of more on like the equip side. In fact, the people that run the federation that I've always competed in the UK, the BPU, it's Emma James and Callie, they are like big equip lifters. So even at that point, like, you know, they were running the federation and it was bringing in a lot of raw lifters because it was becoming more popular. But they would be like, oh, it's not real lifting.
Right.
Because it's like what we do in training, it's not what you should be competing. But
Right.
I mean, obviously that's completely changed now because it's, you know, but for me, like I kind of stuck with raw purely because it was generally just me and my husband training together. So because it wasn't like that popular, like we even in all the gyms we trained in around here, it's you know, it's there wasn't other people doing it. So to then take that to another level and go equipped, you need other training partners, right? Like
Agreed.
so it's not like I was always like, I'm just gonna stick with raw. It was purely just from a training point of view. Like, I mean, now I've kind of got specific goals that I want to hit with raw and wraps or with raw. Um, but I would never say no to equip lifting because at some point you never know.
For sure. Hey, I mean, you're going to be in Ohio too. You know what I mean?
Well,
Rest in peace.
it's definitely the influence there is strongly
Of
on.
course. We
And I
went,
was like,
quick side story. I went to, when Louis was still alive, we went in, I think, 2018, 2019, the West Side. And this was when I was working for Hybrid Performance Methods, Steffi Cohen. And we went there with Steffi, and Louis had no idea who she was. No idea. You know, this is when Steffi was number one in open powerlifting. And when we told her numbers, he's like, oh
what?
no, I need to put her in a suit. He literally ordered her a squat suit, a bench suit,
Wow.
had it all shipped to the gym. She tried it once. It
It
wasn't
was
for
just
her.
like,
He was like, you need to do it. You need to do it. It was funny,
I mean, he
but
just was like, he was definitely in a bit of a bubble, right? Like
for
he didn't
sure.
see past the kind of equipped that was the only way. So
Exactly. Exactly. So, okay, so let's backtrack a little bit. Let's go back to 2015. You decided you want to start competing in powerlifting. You mentioned a couple of things, and well, that will kind of segue into something else. You were kind of training just alone, you and your husband. There was no really powerlifting teams, no powerlifting clubs. Like, what kind of gym were you training at? And then what got you inspired to, whether it was travel somewhere in the UK for a competition or whatever that was?
I mean, at the time we were training in essentially what was almost like a garage, like someone's small little gym that they'd kind of, you know, but even in that scenario, like most of the people going in there were just like going to lose body fat or it
Right.
wasn't like serious lifters. Like
Right.
there are more gyms like that now in the UK, but back then
Oh, yeah.
there was no such thing as a powerlifting gym.
Yeah.
Like I mean, even now there's a few dotted around, but it's not common. And then like not long after that, we just moved to like a commercial gym, like a bigger gym, just because it had better equipment and you know there was more people there, and we both kind of started working there as well. But yeah, like it wasn't like serious powerlifting. So like we got that buzz from going to competitions, you
Okay.
know, and being around other people that like got it, they had similar interests, like you almost felt like a bit of an outsider in the commercial gyms, but that was really the only option back then. Like there wasn't really places to go train. You know, everybody did the same sort of thing because everybody was like in their own minorities around the country. So yeah, I mean it's completely different now because it's been like what, it's like 8 years. So
Yeah, for sure. So
yeah.
2015 to 2019, you know, if there's anything you want to touch up along the way, but you're competing, you have, you know, competed pretty frequently, all around the UK, all around Europe, different places, kind of building your
Yeah.
total. Um, then 2019 comes along, you take a little bit of a break from competing. You get up to a 538 dots, which was very elite, probably extremely elite, especially in the UK and in England and such.
Yeah.
Um, and then you take a little bit of break before breaking into the US. So kind of what did
Yeah.
those years
So
look like?
Like 2019, my last competition was my first pro, but it was in Ireland. It's called the Irish Pro, run by Shane
Yeah,
Brody. So that's like kind of the biggest competition you could do nearby that's got money involved and like more like a pro status. For me, it's not necessarily the money, but like if you want to be better, you need to be around other people of a high standard that are going to push you, right? Like if you're going to competition and like I'd got to a point where I was like, I loved the competitions I was doing, but there was no one there to compete against.
right,
And like part of it for me is like, I want to be pushed. I want to feel like I've got to give everything I've got. You know, you would do that anyway, but when you've got people that are like chasing you for number one, that's going
right,
to push you harder. But yeah, so then I was actually signed up to the Kern US Open in 2020. But
hmm
obviously COVID hit. So
right,
like I was like really hoping that it was still going to go ahead. Like there was a travel ban put in place from the UK, like the US wasn't letting anyone in, but it was supposed to only be temporary. So I carried on training like I was going to go. And then we went into lockdown in like the end of March
right,
2020. And so then like that, I was just like, okay, that's it. I mean, I don't think anyone knew how long that was gonna last, but obviously like the UK was like full lockdown, like you weren't allowed to leave your house. Like most people were sent to work from home. Obviously, I worked in a commercial gym at that point, so the gym was shut.
mm.
Like but like luckily we had like this little shed. It's like a little outhouse at the bottom of our garden. I'm gonna call it a shed because it's like this maybe the size of a single garage at
Is
most.
that what you guys currently train in that I see?
No, no.
Okay, because
So
but you guys currently train in the ceilings are kind of like low and
they're like,
pointed.
yeah, so we have like right now, like we moved into like it's called like an archway unit. So it's an old railway bridge arches. So they're
Okay,
like the ceiling is arched. Like it's
okay,
pretty high in the middle. I mean, we've got a monolith in there, so
okay.
it's tall enough for that. But yeah, like this is a smaller again, like
But
an
but it
actual shed.
got you. Okay, okay.
Like a little wooden shed. That's literally what we trained in for like the whole of 2020 and part of 2021. So
Nice.
yeah,
So
like I
UK
think
was pretty tight with the lockdown.
yeah, like I mean, we had rules at one point where they were like monitoring how much you leave the house. So like you're only allowed to go out for one walk.
That's nuts.
So it got pretty strict. So like we were lucky in that like we'd kind of collected equipment along the way. Like we had a couple of like half squat racks and we had some bars, we had some plates, and we actually had a cable machine that we'd got off Tom's brother. We'd basically made a collection that was enough to do something. And actually, like I had some of the best training I've ever had during that time period because I was working less. Like I moved a lot of my work to online. That was a big transition, obviously, from working in person in the gym. So I had way less stress because I had way more free time. And so I was like training really hard because I could. I had the time to recover. So I made really good progress like that year specifically, just because I could. Like I actually got way bigger because I was like growing, like I was eating more, like my training was going really well. So lockdown had lots of negatives, but like a massive positive for me was like my training and powerlifting, and yeah, like I got a lot out of it. So yeah, I owe a lot to that little shed at the bottom
Oh
of our
yeah,
garden. Yeah, I mean, it is literally like a little wooden shed. It's almost like a Jim Wendy house.
very nice.
Yeah. So,
So fast forward me to 2021, things start opening up. You able to find a
yeah.
competition?
Yeah, so like obviously the Kern US Open did happen that year, but we still weren't allowed to travel to the US. Like the travel ban for the US only lifted at the very end of 2021.
Right.
So like going into early 2021, I was like, I need to do a competition just because like my training's gone so well. I know my numbers are going to be better, but also just to get back out there and have the practice. Like, you're only good at something if you're doing it a lot. So I basically just did the first competition I could. It was like a little like a regional, just like a small regional competition up in Manchester, so just a couple of hours away. Um, and that was like, like it was a bit of a breakout competition for me here because that was when I moved up to like number one in the UK. So,
With 610
um,
dots.
yeah, so like I
Massive.
broke into the yeah, so like that's
Yeah.
what I mean. Like I was like basically putting to show all the hard work I'd been doing over like the last couple of years. And um then I was like, okay, like I kind of want to like actually be able to push myself into bigger competitions now, because I basically competed against myself in that
Right.
competition. Like there were other people there, but like I think everyone was just like, who is
What the
this?
fuck? Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
like
For
what?
sure. I would have
Because
been like that for sure.
like um so like that year I did the Irish Pro again. Again, like at this point we still couldn't travel anywhere. So like I could travel to Ireland, but that was as far as I could go. Um and I won the Irish Pro that year. So I was like, I know, like I was just itching to get to like a bigger competition and be around better lifters. So I then signed up for your meet, the Ghost
Right.
Clash.
Right.
So I was
And I
like,
don't remember
basic.
how I heard of you. I think someone sent me your profile or something. And I'm very well versed, at least in the US and somewhat the international. Like I watch a lot of the Australian meets and stuff like that. So it's like I thought I knew all the lifters, and I see you and I'm like, what the heck? You know? Please, yes, please sign up. Let's go.
Yeah, so I was like super excited. Obviously, like, I'd seen some of the competitions you'd run at that point through Hybrid, and like just some of your like obviously watching Steffi Cohen, she was like one of the, kind of the leading women in the sport that was having a lot of influence. And I'd seen you on some of her like lifts being like literally the best hype man I've ever seen.
That was my career for
So
a while, I like to
no, I
say.
know, right? But like it was, I mean, if you look back at some of the videos, like you only hear your voice. It's
Yeah.
like
Oh
the
yeah.
loudest in the room. So I was like, this is gonna be I was like, I know this is gonna be a good competition, just because like obviously you'd run quite a few before, and just your hype manness is what
There you
brought
go.
me.
There you go.
And then the other big thing was like the names of female lifters on the roster. Like for me, it's always like I want to go to well-run meets. That's a big priority, where I know that the people running it are going to put the lifters first, so that you have a good experience, and like gives you the best opportunity to put all your hard work on display, right?
Right.
But the other thing is actually having other female competitors who, I actually look and go, I want to like go for people that I think are going to beat me, because they're going to push me to my
Right.
best. Like I didn't go to that meet thinking I was going to win. I was
Right.
like, I remember like sitting down and writing down my goals, and like I was like, one of them was to at least try and place top three. But in my head, I was like, that's probably not gonna happen. But like it was a goal. Like, I
Sure.
always have goals. So I
Well,
wasn't
that's probably where your
expecting.
husband also came into play. He was probably the one more actually stressing about that, like looking at
Yeah,
it, because it's
probably.
like it's a whole different ball game, right? Like you mentioned
Yeah.
you competed at other pro meets, you competed at all those different meets, but now it's like there's money on the line. There is, reputation, legacy, whatever you want to call it as well. And it's like
Yeah.
you know what you're capable of, but now you need to be watching these other women, seeing what they've
Yeah.
done in the past, trying to think about what they're possibly capable of. But I really like that your mindset was just let me just go and have fun,
Yeah,
as
absolutely. I
opposed to
mean,
like, fuck, let me crunch some numbers. I want to get my trip paid for, you know?
yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, you're only gonna do the best that you can do. So like as much as like I watch the other lifters, I'm not watching them thinking, oh, how much could they beat me by? I'm just watching because like I find what they're doing inspiring also. But like I've always like, or something that I've always kind of like proud myself on when I get to closer to competition is that I'm just focusing on myself, because at the end of the day, I can't change what I can do. Like I'm only going to go there and do the numbers I'm capable of, regardless of what position that puts me in. So like I want to do the best I know I can on the day. Um, but I do know that like I'm competitive, so being around other really strong women is only going to make those numbers as the best possible they can be. So like I before the Ghost Clash, I'd kind of had a little taste of pro, like what a pro is like, just from the Irish Pro, because I'd done that a couple of times. And the first time I did it, I missed out on first place by like my last deadlift got failed for a technicality, and I would have won if I'd got it. And then the second time I did it, I was like me and Denise Herber, who won this year's Ghost Clash. We were like head to head at the Irish Pro in 2019. And so it was like really close for us. And like I had not had the best meet prep going into that. So I was actually nervous about like placing. And in my head, it was almost like I'd came second the year previous, and I almost had something to prove to kind of try and win it this time round. So like me and Denise were like, it was close. So like that's the first time I'd ever really like looked at
Battled.
numbers about like choosing what lift I was going to do. But I still like, like my last deadlift, I knew that like there was like a moment where like if Denise got hers, she would win. And I was like, I could push my deadlift up more. Like most people would look at that and think I'm crazy, but like I was like, I know that this is what I'm capable of. And like my absolute best right now, I'll give it everything. So I went with that number rather than like going heavier and then not getting it.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
So
Playing.
like I'd kind of yeah, and like I ended up winning that competition. So like I think for her, she was like Ghost Clash 2, like we're gonna go back head to head and I'm gonna try and beat you, which is, I was looking forward to that, but obviously I didn't end up coming for different reasons. But yeah, so like I kind of have fun. I think it's fun because it's like a battle and like, but it's nice, like with Denise and the girl the year before, like it's not. I think that's the thing with powerlifting is that what makes it different to other sports. Like you can have respect and you can have fun even though you're competing against each other.
Yeah,
So
for
like,
sure.
like before the Ghost Clash 2, like when we both signed up, like me and Denise are messaging about like yeah, we're gonna really push each other, like it'll be good fun. And like if I came second to her, I would like have total respect for her because we both just work as hard as each other. And but like obviously I'm going there to try and win at the
Right.
same time.
Right.
So
So
yeah.
going back to the first Ghost Clash, entering that competition, like you had already hit a 562 squat in competition in 2021, and then you went on for a 540 squat. I remember watching some of your numbers in prep, and I'm like, man, she's looking at what you were capable of in open powerlifting, what you qualified for the Ghost Clash with, you were well ahead of that, right? So
Yeah.
going into the Ghost Clash, you were able to break an all-time world record, right?
Yeah, that was
Talk
the
me through what
goal.
your plan was. That was your goal, break that all-time world record and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, when I started out training for it in my head, I wasn't thinking like I'm going to get an all-time world record, but like as my training went on and like the numbers I was hitting, I was like, okay, this is now a goal because I didn't think I was quite there yet, but like my training was just going so well. I kind of changed my approach on how I was prepping for competitions at that point, in that I was only training like every 4 days.
Okay.
So I was doing all three lifts on one day, but I was like squatting and benching in the morning. And then I would go away for a few hours and then I would come back and deadlift. And then I would have like 3, 4 days off based on how I was recovering. And then I would basically just repeat that process. So I was basically doing like mini competition every 4 or 5 days.
Interesting. And how long
Yeah.
did that block of that style of training go?
It was 7 weeks. Yeah.
7 weeks like that. Now,
7 weeks
now,
from when I started it till the competition. So it was more like 6 weeks of training and a deload.
right. So that was your husband Tom, was he coaching you through this? I know he's your coach, but you also have another coach. So who's the one coming up with these numbers on a spreadsheet and with this very unconventional different style of training split?
Yeah, so I mean, along the way, it's mostly been Tom, and like that program specifically was like Tom and Christian Thibodeau, kind of collaborating. Like they'd kind of played around with a few ideas of just because like one thing I always struggle with is my recovery is just not that great. So like I can't train as many days a week as you see most powerlifters
Sure.
training. Um, my training, like my numbers suffer for it. So like I've done like more traditional peaking programs before, like what you generally see, but this was kind of like, let's see if I can push my training intensity a bit more if I'm training a bit less. And it
Right.
worked. So like it's definitely something I would use going forward.
Very
So,
interesting. So I mean it worked. It paid off, right?
yeah.
You squatted
Yeah.
262 and a half, all-time world record, and then
Yeah.
you successfully squatted 596 pounds.
Yeah, yeah. I
It
got
was
called for depth,
you got
which,
called for depth. Yeah.
it's fine. Like I'm not annoyed about it. Like I'm glad I went for it. I'm glad I got it, but I just have to make it, official at some point. I'm actually aiming higher than that, but
I was gonna
you
say,
know,
come on, who
yeah.
calls 595 instead of 601? You know what
Well,
I mean?
yeah, I mean, my goal with that competition was to go for 600, but like I'm also there to build a total. Like pro
Right,
competition is so like in my head, I knew I could get 270, but like
right.
I wasn't 100% sure about the 272. So
Exactly. And that's where it's like
that's
a lot of
literally
people.
playing, you're kind of playing a bit of a game. So
Exactly.
like my goal is always to go 9 for 9. I mean, that's never it's never happened to me, but like I pick numbers. It's you've got to pick numbers based on what you know you're gonna get. And there
Agreed.
is a bit of risk in it. Like I didn't get that third squat, but like I successfully completed the lift. I just got called on a technicality. So
Agreed. And that's where there's a huge difference between actual professional powerlifting and just powerlifting, right? And a lot of
yeah,
people who are listening are just powerlifters and they don't necessarily understand the importance of that game when there's money on the line. It's like sure, there's different milestones. You want to hit these all-time PRs, but it's like you'll look at a lot of these pro level lifters coming to our meets. You don't know, you're not always going to see an all-time world record loaded. You're not going to always see, an
no,
all-time PR loaded. You're going to see loaded what they think they need to hit, in order to win against
yeah.
whoever their competition is on that day. If they have high competition, they're going to have to take higher jumps. If there's not as much competition, you might say, oh, wow, this is under their previous performance, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
for sure.
mean, really for me, it was more about building the total and like putting myself in a good position to kind of podium in the meet. So I don't really pay attention to where I'm at until like deadlift, but I focus on like just trying to build the best total I can. So like I am not like I know we go to max out each lift, but if I've made the mistake in the past where I've gone like balls to the wall on squat and then like completely crashed my bench.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So it's like you've got to find the balance between like hitting the best you can on all three on the same day in quite a short period of time. So
Well, I also think that's also very beneficial and speaks to like that training style that you just said you did, being able to have
yeah,
competitions all the time. You have, that preparedness of doing the lifts back to back with a break here, without a break here, whatever it may be, right?
yeah. I mean, essentially, the only reason, like, I probably would have maybe done all three with a slightly shorter break, but like, one of the reasons why I've not competed is because I've had a bit of a bad back for the last almost 4 years now. And so, like, that training style was literally because I would squat and bench, and then I wouldn't be able to, like, I could barely walk. And so I'd have to go away for a few hours, loosen up my back before I could come back and deadlift. So,
Got it.
um,
Is it is it spinal herniations, muscular, or
So I mean, I actually I can only now say what it is. I didn't know at the time, but like I originally hurt it 4 years ago. Well, almost 4 years ago, just deadlifting. I was really tired one session. I was deadlifting heavy because I was prepping for a meet at the time, and like I let my deadlift rebound off the floor, and I felt like something go in my
mm,
lower back. Um, at that point, it was like everything in my back like seized up, and I basically couldn't stand, walk, sit, like I needed to be carried, like, and it took me like a month just to get back to walking. So like I was in a bit of a mess at the time. Um, I mean, the way the healthcare system works is a bit different in the UK. Is that it's free, like we pay our taxes and it's covered. But generally it's more of like an emergency thing. So like I went to get seen. They said, "There's nothing wrong with you. Here's some painkillers. Go home."
right?
So I kind of like had to do my own journey of trying to find out what I'd done and what I could do to help avoid that in the future. So I've seen a few specialists along the way. Basically got told that I had like a bulging disc, which is really common. A lot of people have it, especially a lot of powerlifters. So I've kind of just always worked around it, made sure I'm doing more core work, more glute work, because those are my weaknesses anyway. Like relatively, I have quite a long torso. So that like my core has to almost be even stronger to support my lower back. I mean, you need that anyway, but like I have to put more emphasis on it than a lot of other people. But yeah, I've basically been struggling. Like every time I've prepped for a competition in the last 4 years, I've been like in complete agony. And when I did the American Pro last year, I literally just couldn't cope. Like I was miserable. I did the meet anyway, but like it was the first time I'd ever lifted and not enjoyed it.
Right.
So
Well, it was a little
I
bit
was like,
hard too, right? Because you had just come off a huge performance at the Ghost
yeah,
Clash, went on
exactly.
a little vacation, but then you got only, less than 5 months to turn it around, come back to the
No, and
again,
I mean
right?
that is hard on normal circumstances, but like I think yeah, like at that point, like I noticed that like my back was starting to affect my leg strength a bit more, and so I basically spent like months almost rehabbing it and working on loads of different weaknesses, and then I actually found out not that like a few months ago that I originally probably fractured my L4 vertebra because now like my images show that like part of my disc had gone up into the bone.
Mm,
So basically like that I needed to give my body like time to let the bone heal so that my disc could almost function better. Um so like it was disc problems, but it stemmed from like actual like problems with the bone itself. Um so yeah, like it was tough because I basically had to take a massive step back. Like, how do you let a bone in your lower back heal? It's not like
right,
you can just put a plaster on it, plaster cast and carry on. Like,
right.
if you fracture or break something in your arm or your leg, like yeah, it's annoying, but at least you can kind of carry on doing other stuff and like just cast that up and let it heal. But obviously with your back, like that's quite difficult to do. So I had to completely strip everything out and go back to just like walking and doing body weight stuff. And so I've slowly been like bringing that back up, which is kind of the reason why I wasn't at the Ghost Clash, just because I wasn't really in a position to like push myself physically. But I mean, the good thing is that like I figured out what was causing the problem. And like now when I go back to actually pushing myself to compete again, later this year, that I'm actually going to be in a way stronger position and I'm not going to be in pain in
Yeah,
my back.
exactly. And that's what the
Which, like, I
importance
mean,
is.
even that Ghost Clash prep where, like, I mean, from the outside, if you look at my training, like, it was like on fire. Like, I was like doing amazing. Like, everything was working right. Like, all my numbers were going up every week. But what you don't see is that, like, I was like a cripple outside of training, like, struggling to walk, in pain. So,
Thank
like,
God for a
sometimes
monolift, right? You don't
I
gotta
know,
walk
right?
with a weight on your
No,
goddamn
I
back.
mean, like we only like obviously like we moved into that unit and only kind of put the monolith together like not long before that meet. So I was like really grateful because training in the shed, I was like squatting out of this half rack, this half squat rack, and like the heights were not right. So I was like kind of shimmying
Calf
out.
raising,
Like, yeah.
like
And I'm like squatting like over 500 pounds on like this little wooden floor, like shimmying out of a squat rack. Like it was probably
that
not helping,
definitely
but
didn't help the back, right?
no,
For
exactly.
sure.
So yeah, having a monolith for training is definitely like a big win. Like it's definitely helped with my squat a lot more.
Oh yeah. So the not to jump around too much, but so the place that you said you guys have with the arch ceiling or whatever, is that a private facility for just you guys that you own? Is it a public gym? You guys work out of it?
So we own it. It's just like we keep it private for ourselves. We have like a small training crew that train there with us, and then me and my husband do like in-person coaching there as well. So like it's kind of like a little business
Very
venture
nice.
also. Yeah, so it's like a bit of both. But it's been good. I think the biggest thing I learned from COVID is that like actually be training in our shed and not in this like massive commercial gym was like a completely different environment and I could focus better and like just get my training done because as much as it's social being in a commercial gym, like people would always be coming over like mid like set, grabbing a plate off the rack that you're on, or like coming and saying hello and you're like in the middle of an exercise. And
For sure.
so we completely like cut all of that out by having our own space. So like the shed was just I really enjoyed that period of time. So like we wanted that, but like with actual safe equipment.
Yes.
I'm not
Fair.
shimmying out of squat racks anymore. And like the floor beneath me isn't like bowing a little bit because there's so much weight on my back.
Right.
Um, so same kind of deal, but bigger with better equipment. So
Nice.
yeah.
So let's connect some of those dots there. You have connections to Elite FTS. I know I saw when you were prepping
Yes.
for the Ghost Clash, you were tagging Elite FTS. You had some Elite FTS equipment there, even though it's a US
Yeah.
based brand. So give me a little history of your history with Elite FTS.
So I first kind of got the connection with, I mean, Elite FTS has always been like a brand that I followed. Like they give out so much free information. So that's kind of been a big part of like my own coaching and lifting journey, just because, they're giving so much away for free. And there's so many different people involved in the company that are like educating. So I liked the ethos of the company anyway. But I basically, my connection was started not long after the competition I did in 2021 when I like became number one in the UK. So basically there's a small UK branch of Elite FTS and they took me on as a sponsored athlete at that point. And so like I was getting a lot of my equipment through the UK company for our own gym. And then my connection to the US side of things had kind of I'd done a couple of like podcasts on the side with Sam Brown while he was still working out there. Obviously he's not there anymore, but and then I got invited out in the summer of last year. And so I timed it with when I was going to the American Pro. And so I went out to the compound for the first time like last July. I went like the last week of my training before I moved on to Virginia to go to the American Pro and just really enjoyed it. Like met loads of really cool people there. Like me and Tom did a podcast with Dave while we were out there. Like we did a little bit of filming for the YouTube. And we stuck around and trained with some of the other athletes while we were out there. And just really loved it. So, yeah, I mean, once you make those connections, you kind of keep in touch with those people. And like Dave and Tracy are just so welcoming. Like they really looked after us while we were there. And like the next time we went back out was then for the Swiss symposium and later that year. So like last October. And Tom actually ended up doing a seminar at it. So
Very cool.
then we also helped like with the VIP event for afterwards. I mean, we kind of just found a bit of a home there, right? Like it sort of just happened organically. Like we got invited out that first time, and then, you know, Dave's always like, you're just more than welcome to come back whenever you like. And, so like we made friends there, like you want to go back. And it's just such a good environment. Like everybody works really hard. I've always kind of wanted, like we've got our small training crew here, but other than Tom, like there's no one else that's really pushing it to the way I do. Like I take it so seriously, it consumes my whole life. Like every decision I make is based on how is this going to make me better. Like I'm kind of in this phase where I want to push it as hard as I can. So if you want to be the best at something, you have to give it your all. So everybody that I work at, that we train with back home trains hard, but they're not doing it for the same reason that I am. So it doesn't mean that they don't take it seriously, but it's almost like on another level. So I was kind of like craving being around other people that it was their life, right? So
Fair.
like
Yeah.
Elite FTS was that place. Like I felt at home instantly when we went there. I was around other people that just got it. It's hard to describe, but like, yeah, they just get it. Like, and then I mean, even just being there at the Swiss, like we met so many great people and like it's just a good place to be. It's just, yeah, I feel at home there. That's like the only
I
way to
love it.
describe it.
I
Yeah,
love
so
it.
I
So
mean,
all that to
Dave,
say, what the people don't know is you're working on trying to move over here to the
yeah,
US,
yeah.
right?
So basically, Dave said to me, like, why don't you come out and do like a meet prep here? I was saying to him, like, I just loved being there. Like, it's made me want to work even harder. So I basically we booked to go out with the intention that the Ghost Clash 2023 was
This year.
going to
Yeah.
be my competition, right? So like we booked to go so that I did my entire meet prep, like 12 weeks leading up to the Ghost Clash out in Ohio. And then I was going to do the Ghost Clash, have like a week and then head back home. So that was the intention. But then like before we even went, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to compete. I think that's when I like reached out to you and said, look, it's unlikely that I'm going to be able to do it. And obviously you said to me, like, I'll keep you on if you think there's like even a small chance. And I was like, I'd really like to, but I'm just not sure. And I didn't want to take the space away from someone else. I wanted someone else to have the opportunity to have that full week, like 12-week prep, rather than like dropping out a month out and no one can take that spot.
For sure.
Um, but yeah, so like we went out to live there for 3 months, and like most of the work that me and Tom do now is online anyway. So like feasibly, like it was okay to do. Obviously, we just couldn't do the in-person work that we'd been doing back home. But yeah, like it wasn't just going out for a week. It was like living there.
Yeah, to make
So
sure that it wasn't just like a
yeah,
honeymoon, and long
no,
week. Like, oh,
exactly.
this place looks magical and grand, right?
Yeah. I mean, for anyone that's like been there, it's almost like a little bit pinch me every time you walk in there, just because they really make you feel at home. They really welcome you. Like all the other athletes training there are just so nice. They work just as hard. They get it.
Yeah.
Like it's
Well,
just the environment is like it, and it's not serious. Like it's still fun, but like we're there to work hard. We're there to like make ourselves better. We're there to like push the boundaries that exist. Like everybody's there for the same thing, no matter what avenue they're in. Like Jaden is a bodybuilder and he does like bits of powerlifting, but like he was like one of my main training partners while I was over there. And so we have slightly different goals. Obviously, he's kind of more pushing the bodybuilding, but we still get a lot from each other because we're both just working really hard and like trying to do the best we can each session. And yeah, so and then obviously like the other side of that was that like we got to be a bit more involved in giving back a little bit more. So like on the YouTube, and like we did a couple of podcasts, and like, I've like kind of focused on myself a lot over the last few years, but like I kind of want to start giving back to other people a bit more, even if I can just share my own experience, but as a coach, just like, and I feel like that's a good avenue to start giving back a little bit more because they have such a big platform. And yeah, so it's like a bit of a win-win from both avenues.
and then I mean, you throw into the mix on top of that also, you're at a disadvantage when you're an
Yeah.
international lifter coming over here to the US, on unfamiliar territory, unfamiliar ground. You have to do, I mean, you do it smart, but not all lifters or international lifters will be as fortunate enough that they can come over a week, 2 weeks, or longer before the competition to try to
No.
acclimate and stuff like that. So, like being in the U.S. for you will be much more advantageous when going around the U.S. pro circuit, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's expensive like having to travel across every time. Like you said, like I try and play it as sensible as possible. Like I think for every hour time difference, you need at least one day,
Yes, agreed.
right?
Agreed.
So like being over here on like different, being able to travel to competitions in the same time zone, like that's going to be it's going to
Yeah,
be a big game changer for me. So like another big reason why we want to kind of get over there is so that I can compete a little bit more. I mean, obviously, like there's a limit, right? 2 to 3 competitions a year is probably the sweet spot, but like I think there'll be more opportunity, like more people to train with and push me, and yeah, like I won't be at a disadvantage anymore because even the Ghost Clash, like I might have come and won, but like I didn't even hit the numbers I'd hit in training because I traveled. I was only there for a few days before, but also like cutting weight is affected by travel. Like,
like,
I don't know about you, but like if I get on a 9 hour, 10 hour flight, I'm swollen for like 3, 4 days after.
yep.
So, but I mean, it's never been enough of a deterrent. Like I said, I think like the best competitions with the best lifters in my head are all in the US. So, like what the WRPF are doing, the number of competitions they're putting up, the standard that they're held at, like, you know, why would you not want to be part of that if you could be?
For sure. And I feel like, especially internationally, even if it's WRPF, WPO, all these other federations, it's, when you're looking at it from the outside here in the US out there, it's not always the same. And you want to be on the most difficult platform as possible so that you have the respect behind whatever your performance is and whatever you do, and it's not doubted, you know,
Yeah.
for
I
sure.
think I think that's another big thing is that like obviously, I'm not going to name any competitions or anyone's lifts, but I know that like when I broke an all-time world record, like I wanted it to be on a big platform and I wanted the judging to be strict so that like I knew it was solid.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you know what I mean? Like my third squat failed. Like I'm not mad about that because I know the platform that all of us lifted on was like a really solid standard, and that we were all held accountable to really good rules. Not that like ones back home aren't. It's just like breaking an all-time. I mean, you could break an all-time world record pretty much anywhere now.
Right. I
Like
mean,
I
especially
could,
it's difficult, and I'll be the one to say it. If you go to a federation that's known for multiply, and the majority of lifters there are going to be
yeah,
competing multiply, you happen to do raw, and you have the same judges in a chair that are used to judging one type of lifting. It's just going to be skewed. Simple as that, you know? But
yeah, yeah. And I didn't want like for as long as I compete, like I will always try and put myself on the best because I just think that, like you want respect for your lifts and you also want to be held accountable to the best standard. So yeah.
agreed.
I mean that's kind of a bit of a contentious subject, isn't it? So
For sure. For
but
sure.
I
We'll
just
go back to
one thing I know for sure from what I've experienced and what I've seen is that like the WRPF is definitely a place where that is like 100% sure.
hell yeah. So to close out, I have a bunch of different questions. I'm going to touch on just a couple of the different questions that stood out that we
Cool.
got from people and that I had. I'm going to start with my question. All right, my first
Yeah.
question that I want to ask is, why the hell are British people so damn nice?
I think we're very reserved and we're very polite. We
Yeah,
have great
man.
manners.
Have you
Yeah.
noticed especially when you came into Miami, it's not nearly like that?
No, I mean, it's just different. Like, I wouldn't say all British people are nice. I know a handful of not so nice
Oh,
British
for
people,
sure.
but
But I mean, I was
I
just over
think
there
we're
for a
just
little over
with,
a week, and I first met you, and
oh, I did.
I'm like,
Yeah.
these are some of the nicest goddamn people I've ever met. And then I went over there, and I'm like, what the hell? Why is everyone so nice and happy and smiley? Like Jesus Christ! Even though the
I
weather is
mean,
shit, it's raining.
the weather is awful, but I think we're just very like cautious of how our behavior affects other people, I guess. Not that like Americans aren't, it's just we're very reserved. I think that's probably the best way to
There,
describe.
I like it. I like
We're
it.
reserved and polite.
What's there? So I don't know. Before you came over for the Ghost Clash, had you come to the U.S. frequently before that, whether it was for
um
competition or pleasure?
yeah, Florida is like my favorite holiday destination. So we come to Florida quite a bit. In
So
fact, I'm gonna be there in like 2.5 weeks. I'm coming out to Orlando to stay with my sister and her family for a week. They don't
hell
live
yeah,
there. They're just also out there on holiday. So yeah, I
hell
mean,
yeah.
we we've done a lot of traveling over in the States just because
It,
we love it there anyway. So
whether it was the first time or recently, there wasn't any kind of culture shock to you growing up in the UK and then coming over here.
okay, so the first time I went to the US, it was to Florida, and I was just like, you literally can't go anywhere without people wanting to talk to you, which
Okay.
isn't a bad thing, but it's just I'm quite outgoing, and I felt very British the first time I went because I was like, you can't even go in an elevator, and someone's like, "How's your day doing?" Which I actually really
Oh,
loved because I
but
found
you were in
people like,
Orlando. You were in Orlando.
yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
mean, it's probably like extra because it's Orlando, but
Yeah, it's more
yeah,
tourists and nicer people. You come to
I
Miami,
found.
there's freaking dicks in Miami, straight
Oh,
up.
really?
Yeah.
I mean, I've been to Miami a couple of times. Like, yeah, it's different, but from my experience, it's always just been good. So
Cool. All
yeah.
right, fair enough. So, a couple other questions. I know which one I'll close with, but what would you say your favorite thing about the sport of powerlifting is?
The people
Fair.
for sure. Like, I feel like I didn't even need to think about that. The people I've met, like. I don't know. There's just something about people in powerlifting.
Well, and
Everybody's just lovely. We all have like the same interests, but like it's hard to even think of many bad people I've met in the sport. There really isn't. Like
agreed. And I mean,
everybody's nice.
both you and I, it's like we've both created careers out of the space. We're
Absolutely.
completely fully immersed into it,
Yeah.
So it's like if we were just surrounded by shitty people, we would be those kind of people that are like, man, I hate my job. Like
Yeah.
I
Oh,
do
I'd never feel
whatever.
like that. Yeah.
Exactly. Never ever feel like that. And whether it's a mix of sure you have your own fulfillment, being in a sport and making a career out of it and the other avenues that you do, but you meet fantastic people. You're surrounded around fantastic people. My gym, literally, like my training has been for a while now. But I go to
But
the
you
gym
don't
every
care.
day. I don't
You
fucking
don't.
care. Half the time I'm like, yeah, I'm going to the gym for these hours, think I'm gonna work out, and I end up just being around
Just
awesome
chatting.
people. You know what I mean? And yeah, I could not agree more. I like that response. I like that response.
Yeah.
So the last question in closing. So we talked about the Ghost Clash performance for the Ghost Clash. You talked about you had set goals. You said that you hit some of them. You didn't hit all the goals for the Ghost Clash because you hadn't hit your numbers that you would hit in training. Do you have any goals that you feel comfortable sharing, talking about for the American Pro this year?
Absolutely. I mean, long-term goal for me is to be number one in the 148 class. Like I'm number four right now. Yeah, so number one, and then another goal of mine is to squat 300 kilos. I think that's like
60
660. Yeah, 660 pounds. Um,
at 148?
yeah.
Hell yeah. Okay.
So
All
I mean,
right.
squat's always been my favorite lift, and it always will be. Like I love all three, but like that's probably why I've given you just one lift. This is my favorite.
Fair.
But yeah,
Fair.
number one in the 67s, the 148s, and maybe not at the American Pro, but long term 660 squat.
What about looking into the American Pro, knowing how you performed recently, how you wanted to perform in a healthy body? What do you think might be realistic for you at the American Pro this year?
My goal for the American Pro is to podium.
I love it.
So top three.
I
Yeah.
love it.
And like coming in fourth at the last one, it was like close, but just wasn't quite there. So yeah, my goal is purely to podium. So whatever numbers I need to do to hit that, that's what I'm gonna do.
I love it. And then last thing is you did mention, goals for with reps, but you also have raw goals and you haven't competed in raw in a very long time, right?
Yeah, I think because I kind of switched to wraps, my focus has been so on that. But like my goal is at some point soon to do a meet in sleeves. And I want to get the all-time world record total. And I definitely know I could do the squat because I've done it in training like multiple times. It's just actually like finding a place to do it on platform. So yeah, like at some point,
Maybe the
gotta
Ghost
get
Clash 2024.
possibly because yeah, I mean I'm definitely gonna be there at the Ghost Clash 2024 because I was like so disappointed to miss out this year. It's like, one of my favorite competitions that I've ever done. So I'm
Well,
gonna be there. Who
I'm going to
knows
be
what I'm gonna do?
announcing it. I'm going to be announcing it hopefully in the next week or two. I just
Oh,
finished
cool.
my
Okay.
logo and stuff, but you'll
Nice.
be the first to hear it. And everyone
Yeah.
who's listening will be the first to hear it. I am pushing the date back from
Cool.
February. It was been,
Yeah,
beginning,
I think
middle of
I
February, the
remember
last 2
seeing.
years. I'm going to push it back to the March 29th, I believe is what it is,
Okay, cool.
to
I think
give
that's
more
it makes
time.
sense because
Yep.
if the American pros like much later in the year, you want to make sure that you've got like a bit of a you want to give people the best opportunity to kind of have a bit of downtime and then get back into
Exactly. 100%. That's
yeah.
100% my plan with it. And
Well,
who
I'm
knows?
definitely gonna see there.
There you go.
Whether I'm in sleeves or wraps, who knows?
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, Naomi, tell everyone where they can find you on social media. We know that we'll find you next to the American Pro. Give us some
Yeah.
details.
So you can find me on Instagram, I guess, Naomi.PhoenixPerformance. Just check it out. Not gonna lie, I've not been posting a lot of my training recently, but I'm getting back on there. I've started doing like a bit more like informational videos too on like how to's. So it's not just training anymore, which is kind of cool.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Naomi. This was tons of fun. Thank you, everyone, for
Thank you.
tuning in. I hope you enjoyed episode number 3, this week's episode of the WRPF podcast.